Hi, my name is Emily Blondell. This is my final presentation for COMM 4900. Say your ages.
24.
I am 20.
20. There we go. So today we're going over the instructor manual presentation From Conflict to Resolution, a soft skills for conflict resolution and communication transformation guide. So first we have table of contents going over the introduction and icebreaker exercises, our training objective, foundations of conflict resolution to get a good basis for what we're going to be going over today, communication styles and barriers to build on that information, solar method, nonverbal cues as a tool, ethical boundaries as a consideration, emotional intelligence and self-regulation as two additional tools, the Thomas Kilmann conflict model instrument for a reference guide, and then we're going to briefly go over the hands-on learning exercise for what is called the conflict ladder that I made. So our training objective today is that at the end of the training sessions, trainees should be able to identify, explain, and apply each step of the conflict resolution process in real-life scenarios. That'll be exemplified at the end of the training guide during the conflict ladder game. So, foundations of conflict resolution. The Handbook of Conflict Resolution Theory and Practice defines conflict resolution as a conceptualized form of methods and processes involved in facilitating the peaceful ending of conflict and retribution. They go over some key points, being that you need to first identify the why or the trigger for the conflict, search for underlying concerns, so what built up to that trigger, brainstorm together for a realistic solution, collaborate to determine next steps, and then confirm resolution and take accountability. The American Management Association says that the more information about the cause of a conflict, the more easily that the conflict can be resolved. So, moving on, we have communication styles and barriers. So 5 primary styles is assertive, aggressive, passive aggressive, and manipulative. 5 primary barriers would be language jargon, cultural differences, emotional interference, physical distractions, and perceptual biases. So the human-computer interaction and augmented intelligence defines the communication styles as being including verbal and nonverbal preferences, saying that they are essential for creating personalized learning experiences that align with individual needs. And then we have the barriers to effective communication by the University of Toledo, saying that culture and language essentially comes down to different beliefs about experiences, relating what is right and what is wrong in communication, so between the sender and the receiver for different interactions and experiences. Moving on to the tool that was previously mentioned, we have the solar method. This is typically for the 65% nonverbal cues, so facial expressions, tone of voice, movement, appearance, eye contact, gestures, and posture, in comparison to the 35% verbal communication, so what you say verbatim, less about what you don't say, would be included in the nonverbal. And that breaks it down into solar being square facing, open posture, leaning in, eye contact, and being relaxed instead of being guarded. So rather than keeping your arms kind of like this and your face like this, kind of sitting more open, engaged, and actively listening to what the sender is saying, so that you receive the message more likely in a way that they intended it for that to be. And defined by the skilled helper, a systematic approach to effective helping would be that solar is a nonverbal listening technique that helps the listener to be physically present for the speaker, conveying attentiveness and openness, as we were just saying. Moving on, we have ethical boundaries, and ethical boundaries defined by boundaries and ethics of professional communication. Conduct would be that they are the parameters that define appropriate professional behavior, particularly in emotionally charged or conflictual interactions where the potential for exploitation or harm is heightened. They also break it down into 5 main points, so that comes into respecting privacy, respecting autonomy, mitigating power imbalances, so if there's a conflict between you and your boss, having somebody come in to level the playing field where one person's not being coerced or pressured into giving in or being manipulated by the other party, maintaining neutrality, and avoiding conflicts of interest. So say somebody is forcing a conflict because they could get monetary gain out of it, or a certain level of tension or promotion, we're going to try to eliminate all of those to make sure that that why or trigger that we previously discussed is addressed properly without ill intent or malicious intent. So kind of the image shows that while you can be going one way, it can very easily continue on one trajectory without some type of proper mediation, collaboration, and identification of the trigger. So that goes into personal mitigation styles, and that would include emotional regulation, emotional intelligence, and self-regulation as well. So self-regulation is actually a skill that plays into emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence being kind of the self-awareness and awareness of others' emotions and recognizing and understand complex emotions besides your own. Being able to understand that while everyone has different ones, we have to still respect other people's and kind of pick up what they are without making a situation worse unintentionally. And that self-regulation skill that comes into play with that is more of like an impulse control. So managing personal emotions, actions, behaviors, and words to keep yourself together. And other skills that go into emotional intelligence would be self-awareness, so that is very similar to having self-awareness allows you to self-regulate. And then social skills, self-regulating helps with your social skills, motivation to continue to self-regulate, and empathy to increase that emotional intelligence and awareness for others. That kind of gets into the Thomas Kilmann conflict model instrument. And we have this lovely graph here where we're going to be looking at the levels of assertiveness and the levels of cooperativeness and what Thomas Kilmann conflict model says about those 5 main types of conflict. So the culture, leadership, and organization defines that assertiveness is the degree to which individuals are assertive, confrontational, and aggressive in their relationship with others, where the conflict, independence, and justice journal describes cooperation as the behavior directed towards the goal of maximizing joint outcomes. So, for example, if we have low assertiveness and low cooperation, we have avoidance, where everyone's just staying separate from each other. We have high assertiveness, low cooperation, then we're in competing, and it's you versus them. And typically that's where things get really messy. So if we increase our cooperation and lower our assertiveness, then we have accommodation, where you might end up sacrificing more than what you're wanting to do, but it could also be similar to competing, where you're like, you don't want to cross any boundaries and you don't want your boundaries crossed. But if we have an increase of both assertiveness and cooperation, then we have collaborating. And that is typically coming together to create, as it says, a mutually beneficial situation. Now, the TKI recommends that compromising is to reach a consensus that is acceptable to all. And that is a healthy mix of you and them. Not you versus them, not you or them, but you and them together, as close to a 50-50 match as you can get. So for this exercise today, we're going to be doing the conflict ladder. So first we're going to get into pairs, and you're going to grab a conflict ladder basket from the front of the room. Each basket has its own scenario in it, and then you're going to take turns placing each step of the ladder as a step of conflict resolution in chronological order, the bottom being moving from tension through resolution up until maintaining the resolution, because conflict resolution does go beyond that initial conversation, as we have discussed with the compromising and collaboration methods. After you have your order decided and picked out, you have it checked with the instructor, and then you are going to write a brief 3 to 5 sentence reflection on why the correct order is the most effective for your scenario. It's important to remember that every method of conflict resolution is subjective and going to be different for everyone, and that's why you're kind of just going to argue why you think yours is the best. And remember that it's not always going to be the same for everyone, but it is something to consider. Thank you so much for your active listening and your active participation.